Good.
Great,
Very well.
Good. Welcome to November's Inner Circle. Hopefully everybody's got the case study. We've got Sarah who's coming in a little bit later. She's got webinars she's running with somebody, so she'll be in a bit later. Just want to quickly go through the case study and then we can get involved in the conversation. And as always, there is a 80s reference. So if you can get the 80s reference, great. There's no prize, but it's just nice to do.
I thought it would have been Pepsi and Shirley, wasn't it? Not Helen and Shirley.
It was Pepsi and Shirley. Yeah.
Oh, well done. Okay, fair enough. Straight away.
Well done for winning no prize. So Helen and Shirley are both employed at a large soft drinks manufacturer. COVID's had very little impact on their work because they've carried on moving forward. So both of them have continued to work throughout, but they've been looking at their future plans in a number of different ways. In a normal year, Helen would have travelled a decent amount, and she's been thinking about what happens next in her life. She's considering moving to St. Lucia, and she's talked to her husband Andrew and doesn't know whether they'll be able to afford to do this. Andrew owns his own event management business. Times have been tough for this year, but he's got some money in the bank, 120k, although £50,000 of that is a bounce back loan. The business is just him, so he's got no creditors or debtors. And Andrew and Helen didn't need about 40k a year to live in St. Lucia, and they've got a wide range of assets. They might start a business out there, which we can talk about. And they've been thinking about what happened to Kate Garraway recently, who couldn't get access to her money because she became ill, because her husband became ill. Shirley's more on continuing with the company. She's thinking about what life after work might look like, but she intends to carry on working. No kids. And she's decently wealthy, she's relatively wealthy, and she's thinking about what her business might look like moving forward. The business that she works with, the drinks manufacturer, employs a staff of 900. They've been looking at financial well-being, but the business has also been going through some HR issues. Shirley, even though that's not her direct remit, is involved on the board, and that's why she gets involved with that. And we'll talk about some of those issues. So let's start with Pradeep. Thoughts on the case study, and what additional questions might you ask Helen and Shirley about the situation?
Sure, love to do that. Interesting case, actually. It threw me a little bit first because you started with Helen and Shirley, and I thought they were a couple. It didn't take me until about 5 paragraphs later when you mentioned Helen and Andrew together, and I thought, has Shirley changed into Andrew?
They're colleagues. They're not a couple.
Well, that's what I figured out eventually. But the key thing was saying Lucia. They tied up Andrew and Helen, because otherwise I thought Helen and Shirley was a couple in the modern context. But yeah, it sort of revealed a little bit more here. Interesting case. They are all at a certain age when my tagline is grey head, silver head, colored hair, no hair generation. And I reckon they fall into that area, even though the ladies won't fall into that in terms of admitting it is themselves. Question-wise, there's a lot of things that has really come into my arena of expertise, really. Good to know that Helen has already been thinking about what next in life. And I think pretty much everybody in that generation should be thinking that for themselves as well. And it's good to know Helen has also wondered about permanent move to St. Lucia. A lot of people don't really know where to go next, but at least she's got a connection. By the looks of it, she's got a family there as well. A couple of things I'd really like to know and ask questions is about, at this age, it's very crucial to ask, what state of health are you in? Particularly with the COVID, your health challenges would have changed from pre-COVID to now. And I think it's impacted every single one of us in attendance today in some form or another, in terms of health challenges, no matter how small. Could have been just aches and pains to, simple thing like getting agitated over little things. And these are the type of things to consider, because these are all something that gets stored into your system, which could manifest into something bigger. Things about Shirley. No, first thing is Andrew and Helen. We don't know if they've got any children. That could have an implication moving forward. We know that they've got families in the Caribbean, or even grandchildren for that matter. That has an implication on what they want to do and how they map out in the years ahead. Do they have any shared interests? Because if you are living your own life differently in business or in employment, you have your own life in work, and your life together is evenings and weekends and some holidays, I guess. And then moving on to Shirley, it's good to know that she intends to work for the next 7 years, but what's in store for next 7 years? What has been prominent about Shirley is that she's having difficulty identifying between her own life and her identity in work. This is a very important thing for most of us, because our business and our lives are branded under the same thing. Particularly if you're using your own name, you become one of the same thing. And when you give up one part of it, you do lose your sense of identity. So it's something that I'd really like to address with Shirley about what would we like for her in the 7 years' time. Shirley obviously faces challenges in continuing what she's doing now. A lot of us have passion for our businesses, and that dictates our lives. So to let go of what we're doing, it can be very challenging in itself. I'm not saying let it go completely, but take some elements of it to build something moving forward and letting gradually go of something. It's a bit like a house clearance in your life, or rather life clearance. So loads of questions to ask, but the key thing is to sit down and explore different parts of their life, what is important to them. And then from there, at that basis, they can start making decisions about their finances, what's involved, the legal aspect of it, where they want to live, all these things the rest of the panel can start helping them with. But first thing is getting their own sense of identity and a sense of direction.
Yep, thank you. Cheers, Bradley. Sharon, thoughts? What were your thoughts on the case study?
I was miles away for a minute. There's a lot in here. I did work out that they weren't a couple. Good point for that. What are their pension arrangements? So you said there that there's pensions. What are their plans? Are they planning to draw on those pensions? Are they planning to take lump sums? Property we've got, there's no mention of them having any kids. Who do they plan to leave anything to? For Andrew's business, does he have a potential buyer? Is there an option there? He's got money in the business. What are his plans to extract that from the business? Can that go into a pension for him?
Yep.
Has he paid 40k into his pension for a year? Has he reached that limit? So lots of thoughts on that one.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing with that, Sharon, is that his maximum pension contribution, if he's an employer, could have, if he makes a contribution via an employer, would potentially be up to 160k. So he could use 3 years back, carry back. Now, clearly that doesn't leave enough capital in the business, but certainly you've got that issue. Hi, Lisa, you're right. Sorry, Sharon, I interrupted.
Sorry for my lateness.
Go on, Sharon.
So that was part of it. The other things that I've got here is for Shirley's situation. Who does she have? Does she have siblings? Does she have nieces? Does she have nephews? She's obviously amassed a fair bit there. What are her plans for it? And looking at, flipping back to Andrew, it's a bit disjointed, I apologise. Going back to Andrew for a second, if he has the option to run this business remotely, is that something he wants to do? The question then is how many days he comes back to the UK for, and where he's then considered domicile, because obviously that has an impact. Where's he going to be taxed? effectively, does that stay in the UK? If he's running a UK limited company and he's taxed abroad, does the company need to be registered abroad? It opens all sorts if that's the way he chooses to go with it.
Yeah.
And then going back, sorry, to Shirley. First, LPAs is the other thing that obviously springs to mind, obviously. And for Shirley, who does she have? She's amassed this fortune. She wants to retire in 7 years. What does she plan to do with her retirement? And what are her plans for this fortune that she's amassed? She can travel. She's clearly got plenty to travel on for many, many years. A few world cruises, maybe. And the other thing is the business that they have the opportunity to start going back to St. Lucia. Andrew has this opportunity, or they've got this opportunity to invest in this business, which after 3 years, they've got their return on investment effectively, and anything else after that is a bonus. Okay, yeah, maybe a risk, but it's an option, and I don't think a bad option, to be honest.
I wonder, I mean, one of the things that I want to explore as well is potentially if he decides to close down the event management business, is liquidating that business while it's an active company a better option potentially? Maybe, don't know, but we might explore that a little bit later on. So thank you. Ian, thoughts?
Yeah, I think you've given us an enticing amount of information and left an enticing amount out, as is your usual ploy. So, yeah, I think when
you've been to too many of these, Ian. You've got my game's up, isn't it?
So, in terms of Helen and Andrew and a potential move to St. Lucia, I think the one thing that I would be wanting to talk to them about is how soon they're wanting that to happen. Now, when is this next stage in life going to happen? Because that is something that can affect a lot of their decisions. So, with regard to Helen, obviously she's going to carry on working with her soft drinks manufacturer for the remaining time that she's in the country. But can she also do that from a remote working activities as she's been doing for the last 8 months? There's if Andrew does and can successfully run the event management business from St. Lucia, is there any need to have any further investment in a boat charter business? So it's all about doing the research, finding out all of that kind of thing first, and also finding out.
Part of that might just be so that they've got something to do, right?
Oh yeah, but I mean, this charter business is also one thing that I find very intriguing. £80,000 startup capital. I mean, it's obvious that they're not going to be buying any boats for that amount of money. Not on a large scale anyway. So it means that that's what they consider they need to provide surety in the new market. So they've done a certain amount of research, but then what does that mean in terms of the underlying running costs? How will it affect their gross profit margin, and how will that impact that projected £25,000 per annum income? Another thing that's kind of missing here is Helen's current salary.
Yeah.
So that also can have a big impact on what they choose to do next. And I've also noticed, I don't know if Helen and Shirley have shared this amongst each other, but Helen's pension is 194,000. Shirley's is 980. That's a very interesting difference.
Yeah.
So understanding how that's come about may also be very useful if there's been a reason why Helen hasn't put as much in. Have they been sustaining an elderly parent through care or whatever? Having a bit of history around it, I think, would also be useful.
I mean, typically you'd look at each client in isolation, wouldn't you? So the comparison between the two might be a might be something you wouldn't do, but certainly there could be a bunch of reasons for that.
One's got family and one hasn't. So you find if you're single, you might be chucking a whole load more into your pension than you would if you've got a family to support.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, that could be a reason. Okay, cool. Thank you. Richard, thoughts on the case study?
Yeah, I think what Pradeep said at the start definitely rings true with how the current situation is out there, COVID-19 affecting things. People of this certain generation, age and stage of their careers and life will be having this type of thought. I've certainly spoken to people that are looking to raise finance on property to take them on to springboard on to the next stage of their life, or to capture some of the hobbies that they never got on to doing, and so on and so on. I think Sharon, Pradeep and Ian have covered quite a lot that I've already written down. But some of the other things I would have asked, I would have picked up on the bounce back loan, the 50k. Of course, yes, it's free for 12 months, if you like, in the sense that the government repays the interest. But after that amount, after the amount of months, the client would have to pay it back. So if we're going to have a conversation around raising finance on a property, the repayment therefore of the bounce back loan will be factored in as an outgoing. So that may have an impact.
Yeah. I mean, the only challenge you've got is that's company money, isn't it? So if they raise money personally,
yeah,
potentially they'd have to do a director's loan into the business, Sharon, to pay off the loan. That might create some complications potentially.
I've just effectively isolated that money on my notes, in assuming that if they haven't used it, as it becomes due for repayments or interest starts kicking in, they'll just repay the lump sum.
Yeah, they've got the money in the bank, haven't they?
And not use it.
Yeah,
Money they pay it, it's not needed. So why pay interest on money you don't actually need?
correct. That's the conversation. Yeah. So, and then carrying on with that type of conversation, I would have been asking Andrew and Helen about the 520k property that they have. Would they be looking to go to St. Lucia for a certain amount of time? So therefore, perhaps we could retain the property in the UK and use it as a base. Maybe we could raise finance on this base by way of an investment in property conversion. And then whichever amount of money is then agreed for, we could set them up over in St. Lucia. So that's something I would look at. The trust and LPAs and the wills conversation, I think that was already mentioned. Again, as a highlight, I think through Kate Garraway. But that sort of conversation is drawn out as part of a mortgage application anyway. We've already spoken about whether they have children or not. So that's already been discussed. And then just the impact of Helen leaving her role. I was just thinking very quickly about the package that she would leave on, and what that would allow her to do initially, and the short term and medium term straight after she left work.
Yeah. So I don't think I've put on there on the case study how long she's been at the firm. So potentially, if it's Lisa can talk a bit more about this. Potentially, if it's longer than 2 years, there could be a redundancy package there, couldn't there?
Yeah.
So you've got that costed into the situation as well. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate that. Kevin, you're on mute, mate.
Okay, let's start again.
You know what? I was really tempted to wait till you was about 5 minutes in, but that is closed.
Okay, not to go over what everybody else has already said. And the main point is they're missing the basics of the will and the power of attorney for a start before you go anywhere else. The other part is, would you go 100% into one island, which having been St. Lucia is lovely, but as one off. So it's a discussion on keeping the main home in the UK or a separate home. But I think what this really highlights is how every type of profession can work together in a longer term. This is really not for my type of advice in the first 4 or 5 years, but it'd be coming off working with financial advisors, other accountants, where 5 years' time, picture may be very different, where us then could come in with later life lending solutions and say, okay, we can assist in more of a way. At this moment in time, if this was a live client, I'll be passing it back to somebody like yourself, Chris, around say, not for my a requirement, but they need your advice, please come and talk to them.
Yeah.
Opportunities, buy-to-let, etc. from that side to keep going in the UK. That's my main points, which have been different.
So let's fast forward then 5 years.
Yeah.
Where might you think you could help them in if they're in their late 60s, early 70s, as opposed to now?
One of the biggest things is people's pension pots. Look at inheritance tax planning.
Yeah.
You can use your property as an asset to draw income down on rather than drawing down on pension.
Yeah.
Tax-free cash sum is coming out of your property. You've got the flexibility there. You can keep using some of your tax-free cash alongside extra release. You can delay it. So if they then get into their early 70s and in the position, you can review it before they get 75 and restart some of the pensions there. You've allowed extra growth on the actual pension pot in terms of flexibility. So that's sort of areas where we would be coming in further down the line. Depends how well the chart business went. If they had a year like this year and a bad hurricanes over there, they could wipe it out. So this is where we would be more in a possible recovery scenario, or on the pleasant side, an opportunity to say, right, save your family inheritance tax planning. This is why we're looking at it as an alternative.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because like if you look at Andrew's current business and the fact that it's been impacted by COVID so much, is then potentially going into another business where external factors could have a huge impact again. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, very much.
Hi Lisa, you right? Oh, she's on
Hang on. Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry I was late. I just the link had been deleted when my laptop was reset a couple of weeks ago. So
don't worry. Anyway. I think everybody here knows each other because they've been to an inner circle before. So do you want to give a brief introduction on who you are?
Yeah. Okay. Hello everyone. I'm Lisa Seagroat and I'm running a company called HR Fit for Purpose, which I founded 3.5 years ago. My background has been operational and then in going into the HR role. So for 10 years now I've been practicing HR, I teach it, and I'm a full HR generalist. I don't particularly specialise other than encouraging my clients to create healthy workplace cultures so they retain their staff and keep their costs down. So I do specialise in that area based on my own experience, but otherwise I'm a bit of a broad brush HR generalist. I go across all the different HR domains that my clients need support and help with. So lovely to be invited. Thank you very much, Chris.
It's all right, you're welcome. And there's a really juicy bit at the end of the case study just for you, Lisa. So the elements that I want you to focus on is the HR issues with the HR team finding themselves dealing with issues as opposed to being proactive. And Shirley thinks the firm's led relatively well, but there's too many mistakes going on. And there's been a bullying issue. The individual in question apologised that the person felt that way, but they felt they was just being direct. No link to any particular political situation that's been recently. That didn't inspire me at all much. But certainly, again, it highlights the potential for that to happen in any workplace, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And one where an individual didn't get promoted and felt they were being discriminated against. Thanks for that comment, Ian. Discriminated against because they didn't get a promotion. So talk to me about how you might be looking at supporting Shirley and her employer to deal with those.
Okay. Do you want me to do that now?
Please.
Right. Okay, so what I can see here is generally where you've got an environment that's chaotic and firefighting in business when it comes to HR, there's a complete lack of planning, strategy, call it what you want. There's probably not a people plan in place in terms of, you know, where that fits in with the strategic plan for the overall business. Because at the end of the day, you should have a strategic plan there so that you've got, you know, you've set out your stall essentially, and then your people plan spins out of that so that you can then deliver your strategy, because generally 9 times out of 10 you need people to deliver a strategy. It's objectives and deliverables for the organisation. So what we've got going on here, by the looks of it, if I was going into a client and presented with this, I would straight away say, where's your strategic plan or your business plan, and how does the people stuff fit into that?
Okay, well, actually, you know what we'll do, Lisa? We'll talk about solutions later, but you go into that business, all you know is those 2 paragraphs. Let's start with the additional questions you'd ask. How would you approach it in terms of asking questions?
I'd want to know what training they've got in place for their people. So where's the training plan for a start? Because if mistakes are being made and people, may feel like they're being discriminated against, or they haven't been appointed into a role and they feel that's been unfair, there should be, training support in there and a sound recruitment process within the business, including internal vacancy opportunities for promotion, which should follow a process just the same as any other interview process, so it's fair and transparent.
Yeah.
That's why you end up with people saying they've been discriminated against and not treated fairly, because quite often we miss a trick in business with internal promotion. We forget that it should be approached just like any other vacancy opportunity. So I would say there's probably a big gap there. Where you've got accusations around discrimination and all the rest of it, it again often comes back to a lack of training, particularly around dignity and respect in the workplace. Once upon a time called bullying and harassment, we call it dignity and respect now because it's a bit more positive. So again, you would come back to look at training for that in terms of how we interact with our colleagues in the workplace and all of that kind of human dynamic stuff that makes all the wheels turn, the cogs in the wheel turn properly, making people work together better. In terms of some of the mistakes as well, there's probably a lack of systems and processes going on here. If they're firefighting all the time, they're literally dealing with stuff as it pops up daily, and it's probably taking them ages to fix it because no one's actually spent a day in a room to unpick it all and maybe put it back together again and say, this is what we need.
It goes back to that strategic perspective, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Let's take a helicopter view and see what we can expect.
So, we spend lots and lots of time. I've seen it in HR with clients and where I've worked before, where we waste so much time with stuff that's broken that would be better if we just carved a week out to sit in a room and battle out all the issues and put some systems and processes in place to support people, but also train them how to use them. And then mistakes won't necessarily happen. So that's my sort of synopsis, really, my kind of diagnosis of what I can see going on there, Chris.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate that. So just do a quick freeze of where I'd go with this. So what extra questions would I ask? Okay. So I'm gonna actually start with Shirley. So a couple of things that I look at for Shirley. I'd say number one, where does she want this money to go? So, like, has she got nieces and nephews? But interestingly, she's certainly going to have an inheritance tax issue with that size of the estate, unless she gets married, which we don't know whether she will or not, because then her allowances go up. But in addition to that, the other thing that I'd look at is what causes are closest to her heart, because certainly a charity donation is free of inheritance tax, so she might want to give some of the money away in the event of her death. But if she gives away 10% of her estate, it reduces the remaining inheritance tax bill by 10%. So she might want to make a decent donation. If she hasn't got any causes close to her heart and nobody to leave the money to, how do we spend the money better? So how do we make sure that she's in a position where she's doing as much travel as possible? And why 7 years? So if she can afford to do what she wants to now, do we need to look at potentially doing it earlier? I suppose the other thing I'd look at for Shirley is what parts of the job does she love to do? What parts of the job doesn't she enjoy doing? And can she do all that as an independent consultant? Because if it's not about the money anymore and she's got enough, could she get a better balance to make sure that she'd be okay? So certainly I'd be looking at all of that. For Helen and Andrew, I'd certainly be running a cash flow to see if they're in a situation where they've got enough. And what I'd do is I'd run a number of scenarios. So number one, will they run out of money if they have no other income apart from what they've got? Odds are that they would. Number two, if they invested the money in the business and it went well, would they run out of money then? I suppose there's an element to say, how long would they want to continue to run the business? Because a charter business might just involve admin, but it might involve some element of physical work that they might want to stop at some point in the future. So there's that. But in addition to that, what happens if it all goes wrong? So what happens if they're in a position where they invest in the business, it does go wrong? Are they then putting their longer term financial plan at risk? Because then having that information allows them to make an informed choice about whether they want to do it or not. So I think they're the elements initially that I'd look at. Let me have a look. And I think they're the sort of questions that I'd want to ask. There's probably going to be some more that will flag up in a little while. Friday, what would be the key bits of information that you'd want to really identify where both Helen and Shirley are going with this?
A couple of things here, actually, Chris, both for Helen and Andrew, is what is it that is so important for them in their life? Because there are things that would have taken priorities in the past where their employment is there, their business running is concerned. Moving forward in the next later stages in their life is what is it they'd like to take it with them there to something for fulfilling. I would like to ask them about what is it that they have in shared interest that they could do together, because in life, unless you have a goal to do things together, you are going to remain stagnant. But when you do something, you become a lot more vibrant mentally and physically. And that's important in later life, to have something, get your head around it, to at least immerse yourself in something like that. Otherwise, that'll have repercussions on your health and your other relationships and life in general. It can become disillusioned and disoriented. So I'd really like to ask a few more questions about what their own personal interests are, hobbies or anything that they would have had buried in the past that they didn't have time for. What is it that they can do together? And also, importantly, their social network. Families is important because they sustain you, they keep you engaged mentally and physically and help you learn about yourself as well. And also the extension of social network is what you would have had in your work environment, where you've got Shirley and Helen who work together, so they know each other and they know their other work colleagues as well. But when you step off the career path, you will leave that behind. So you need to fill it up with something else. So a lot of questions about what would they replace it with.
Okay.
And these are all conscious decisions. Otherwise, what tends to happen is you'll have people and places, situation just coming to you, and it's not going to be to your liking. The best thing is to choose now.
So let me understand. Let's say Helen and Andrew have separated their lives because they've got their own social circles, their own work. How would you, as a coach, navigate that gap?
That gap when they do get together, because in work environment, in your career, Andrew's got his own business, so he would have had his own social network of clients and suppliers and colleagues and peers in his business and in his industry as well, so all the experts. For Helen, it would have been her work environment. So when they do decide to pack in both the careers, then they do need to bring themselves together and identify what is it that they can do together. Because obviously you leave your other things behind and you need to fill that void to fulfill it. Otherwise, you're going to be pining for those good old days and just keep mourning over it day in, day out, and you're not really moving forward. So you need to reconcile with yourself about what you're leaving behind. It's a bit like a bereavement process. You know, you let go of something familiar, but you need to fulfill it with something new in your life. Otherwise, you're always going to be going back to fill in the void with something from the past, which is not practical anymore. So that applies to a lot of people who go through changes, even from employment to business. And in certain cases, even when you go into later life, you have still got certain elements of work that you'd like to do, maybe leave a legacy, or use the expertise that you've accumulated throughout your career. So use it in small measure to keep you still engaged, perhaps not at the intensity you would have had in your full-on career. So a lot of questions for both of them to ask. Shirley would have enjoyed what she was doing at work in a factory environment, because it's a familiar environment to go to Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And when you don't have that, how do you fulfill that space in your life when you're at home? You haven't got work colleagues to talk to. You're not physically active because you're working. And even things like office banter or on the floor banter, you'll start missing those things.
Yeah,
and it's a huge void to fill in.
Thanks, Pradeep. Appreciate that. Sharon, what information would you like to understand a bit more about to support this, Helen and Shirley?
I'd like to know a bit more about Shirley and who she has. She must have somebody in her life, surely. Surely Shirley must have somebody.
Surely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what her plans are. It seems an extremely lonely life just to roll along and amass all this money and not have anybody to share it with, to do something with. So that would be my biggest thing, to understand more about that. And also for Helen and Andrew, then there's what are their exits? What do they want to do? St. Lucia is one thing. Is St. Lucia a permanent move? Do they bounce backwards and forwards? Who do they have? What do they want?
Yeah. So what does their time look like in a typical year, for example? It's really interesting. One of the questions that we use, and we're not coaches, but we use some coaching questions to help get to the bottom of what our clients want to achieve. And I might have shared this with some of you in the past, but the 3 questions we'd really like is, if you only had and they're quite direct, so you've got to do them sensitively, but if you only had a day to live, how would you spend your time? If you only had a month to live, how would you spend that month? And if you only had a year to live, how would you spend that year? And the year one is really interesting, because the day one really identifies what's super important, and normally it's family. So I think your point about Shirley is an interesting one, because how would she spend that day? But then the year one is a bit of a longer time frame, isn't it? And it might not be a year in St. Lucia. It might be 3 months in St. Lucia and doing something else. So that could be useful. What else? What other thoughts did you have, Sharon?
What my other questions? Let me just, sorry, I've moved off my Word document where I've written all my scribbles, which wasn't helpful. The other thing is, what's her plan for old age? She wants to retire in 7 years, which is great, but what does she want to do with her retirement? So we touched on, does she want to travel? What does she want to do? Does she want to, I don't know, does she want to do voluntary work?
Yeah.
What's her passions?
I mean, it's really interesting. So as you guys know, a lot of the elements that I take from this are based on the work that we do with existing clients. And I've got a client who's very similar to Shirley. And when she stopped working in her job, she took a couple of NED appointments, non-executive director appointments. And one of them was for a charity she was really passionate about. So it's what do you care about that you can use your skills to potentially add value? I think that's an important one, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what gets you out of bed in the morning at the end of the day? It's all well this myth about retiring. What do you do with your time?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If money was no object, which potentially it is for now, how would you spend your time?
How would you spend your time? Because you still want something to fill your time, even if you're retired. You still need something. You need brain food.
100%. Talk to me a little bit about the options we've got with Andrew's business. So he's got this event management business, money's in the bank. He might just close it down and move because he doesn't feel that he might not feel that he can run it if he moves abroad. Could he sell? Could he liquidate? What could he do? And what are the options? And what should he consider?
We could sell because there's no reason for him not to sell. There's also no reason for him not to operate it remotely. If he's got contracts and he feels he can do that, the only issues then is where he's effectively deemed to be domicile and where he's taxed. But if he sells it, it seems like he's pretty much on his own in this business. It doesn't seem like there's much of a internal buyout. So it's who he sells it to.
Yeah.
And it's
whether there's a market for it, right?
It's absolutely. And how the business is valued, what information does he have? Does he have regular accounts? Does he have management accounts to support his activity? Okay, COVID would have had a hit. What's his plan to come back?
Yeah.
So it's really just the state of the business as to whether or not it's viable to then try and sell it.
Yeah. And if he just decides to liquidate, what the tax implications of him doing that?
So the implications is how he then gets, obviously he's got money in the company, pay back the buyback loan, you've still got 75, the bounce back loan, you've still got 75k in there.
Have you got to pay that back, Sharon? Nobody told me. What? What's going on?
Thank you that.
I thought that was a gift. No, I'm joking, of course. Yeah, of course you've got to pay it back. So you pay back the loan. But
very many people have seen it exactly that way, the gift, and what people have done with their bounce back loans, honestly, you would not believe.
You know what? It's interesting because we decided to get the bounce back loan, and the money's sat in the bank because we haven't needed it. And it was just that having that additional piece of capital was a bit of assurance to know that because nobody knew at the start of 2020 what it was going to be like. But we'll just pay it back. But the interesting thing is, and again, we work with clients about the emotional side of money. But the interesting thing is, people have seen it in the bank and probably spent it for everything but the purpose it was meant to be for, right?
They have done all sorts with it. I've got one particular individual who's actually gone as far as building a summer house with her bounce back money. And it's like, how on earth do you plan to justify that?
Yeah.
A, used it for capital, B, used it for personal capital. This is director's loan. You owe the business this money.
Yeah, that's scary. That's scary.
Liquidating, obviously, it's then how he gets the money out of the company, because somehow there's going to be tax to pay on it. And it's what's the best road. If he goes down the liquidation route, there's liquidators to pay. If he hasn't maxed out his pension contribution, my option would be make a lump sum payment into your pension and then liquidate it, because obviously then you've not got that issue. So that would be my recommendation to him.
Yeah, 100%. No, that makes sense. And if he liquidates, does he benefit from entrepreneurial leave? He does, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so that's good. Great stuff. Ian, help me understand what extra information you think you might need.
Okay, so I think this kind of also goes partly along the way that Pradeep and Sharon have just explained, but I'd sit down predominantly with Helen and Andrew, initially individually, to understand what their personal goals are. Even without bringing in the question of St. Lucia, what kind of timing are we looking at for anything that they're doing? Because it's those personal goals, if they do make the move, if they do have a business together with their boat charter business, then those personal goals have got to align correctly to make the boat charter business successful. Otherwise, it just won't work. And if that does seem to be a way forward, I would then bring Shirley into the picture in the same way, have a conversation with her about her gathering of wealth and how she would want to use that. So, for example, would she want to be an investor in Andrew and Shirley's new boat business? because that might be a way that she can help her, I'm assuming, long-standing friend Helen, in later life, and help set them up with something that's a passion of theirs. It's also a fact that, again, someone mentioned about, what does Shirley really like doing, and if she were to stop working at the drinks manufacturer, what else would she want to do? Would she want to help Andrew with the event management business over here in the UK? And if they are going to keep a house over here, can the earnings from the event business pay for the upkeep of the house in the UK and for Shirley's efforts in marketing the business? When we get back to Andrew and Shirley, Andrew and Helen, sorry, it's going to be who does what to earn the money, how do they see that working, and where do they see the money being spent? It's also where their personal goals comes in. What leisure activities are they going to want to pursue? What hobbies are they going to have in their later life?
So I've just thought of a question that I need to ask Sharon, but there's one I need to ask you, right?
Right.
So I run a family business, as a lot of you know. How do you bring up the conversation about the dynamic of working with your spouse or your brother or whoever it may be, to make sure that fits right? Because it looks like they've never done this before.
Precisely, yeah.
Helen's employed, Andrew's got his own business. So how do you make sure that you're helping them make sure this is right?
Well, this is what the individual interviews are for, because one of the questions you've got to be blunt. You've got to ask them to give an honest response. Do you think you can work with your partner? If so, who would be the boss? Who would be the one responsible for making the decisions? It's got to be a question that's asked, even when you have a limited company over here. It's always recommended that in any family business that there is an individual who holds 51% of the shares, so that there is no dispute as to who owns the ultimate power.
I mean, it'd be interesting to have a bit more of an exploration on that, but I can certainly talk for my business. Like in our business, Cass is the ultimate decision maker on a lot of it. On some aspects, I am. So we sort of split responsibility between you. So does there need to be an ultimate decision maker for everything, or is it more? See, I'm less keen on that approach.
It's not even less keen. It's for everybody's security, and I've been dealing with this with a client at the moment. While everything is hunky-dory and everybody's happy, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not going to be, but we know how life can throw these curveballs at us, and everything's great. These informal arrangements are fine. When the going gets tough, these informal arrangements have so many holes in them, and the person who's put the most in stands to lose the most effectively. So the particular case I'm talking about, I've got two brothers who have bought a property between them. One has paid 75% of the deposit and the other's paid 10% of the deposit, which is great. But there's no shareholders agreement that says, should anything happen, this is what happens. So we're now putting in place a shareholders agreement. The idea between them, the idea of doing this is a wonderful idea, because they want to basically build this portfolio so they can support family members who are less fortunate than they are, which is great. But one of my clients is paying an awful lot of tax on all of this money he's then gifting out. So we've looked at ways to try and level this playing field a little for his purposes. So you then have this, it's effectively conflict of interest. Which shareholder are you trying to protect?
It's an interesting one, but I think Lisa made a comment. I'll come to you on this in a minute, Lisa. But you're right. The formalising those arrangements in any business makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really interesting because we're doing some work with a couple of clients at the minute in this area, where they've had the shareholders agreement, but they've not made an agreement what happens in the event of death of any of the directors. So they've got a shareholder agreement, but they haven't got a cross option agreement that says that like partner gets the shares, but actually the director can buy the shares back. And yeah, it's that's an element that's normally missed quite a lot in our experience. Richard, what were your thoughts in terms of getting a bit more information about this particular client? Where else would you want to know?
A couple of other things really on the Andrew and Helen's sides. I was having a little think a bit around the St. Lucia proposition with their friends. We don't know much about their friends, do we? We don't know how much they're going to contribute. I mean, they've said they've sat down and they've worked out a figure of, where is it, 80,000K up front. We don't know who's putting.
So where's that come from, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's upfront capital. You know, I appreciate we don't know what the, it says income 25K a year. Is that, you know, what's the ongoing capital to generate that 25K income? So on and so on and so on. I also kind of thought, actually, is this really an expensive hobby that these friends have all got together and thought, we're, you know, we're wealthy-ish to a point that they've achieved whatever they wanted to do. And now actually this whole pandemic's making them think, let's go on and do something that we've always wanted to do but never have. So again, it comes back to the conversation around how long they maybe set themselves up over there for, and you know, relinquishing a base here in the UK. Because I did kind of link it to that 80K, the upfront capital. Is there a building purchase? Is there any finance or property needed to have, you know where I'm coming from in this. So, you know, we have links here that with brokers that can get you property finance abroad.
Internationally.
Absolutely right, absolutely right. So that's where I was coming from. And, you know, the 25K per annum, if they are over there full time, what does that look like split 4 ways between the two couples? You know, so
I tell you what also that raises, is there an alternative way for them to achieve their goals? So if they want to go out and boat in St. Lucia every day, what would it cost them just to have that as a hobby as opposed to as a business?
Right, exactly.
I had a client whose aspiration was always to have a flat in New York. Okay. And he said to me, okay, I want to buy this flat in New York. I was like, well, how often are you going to be over there? And it was about a month a year.
Okay.
And I said, well, why are you buying a flat? You know, why don't you just stay in a really nice hotel for a month a year and actually save yourself the hassle and the cost of doing it? So it's looking at those alternative options and digging a bit deeper in terms of what their goals are. But yeah, it's really good, Richard. Thank you.
That's where I'm coming from.
Kevin, thoughts?
General, to be honest, Chris, haven't come sat listened to everybody else. I don't think there's much more you can really add. We've been thorough. Like anything, any case study always bring up further questions, but there's still everybody sitting there talking to people. You understand that you get more in depth. That's really what I would say, rather than what I've heard. It's still information coming from all sources today.
I tell you what's interesting though, because your perspective on it may be when they are looking at their lives in 10 years or potentially in 15 years later, right? And one of the factors that we have conversations with clients on is care.
Well, yeah, you're taking to the extreme now, fair enough. I won't spoil a very positive outlook in the early 60s, to late 80s and care.
But you know what's interesting though? I am a natural optimist, but I think like sort of playing for the best and prepare for the worst is the way you've got to go. So there's and again, it's really interesting because when we build financial plans, care can potentially skew that financial plan because of its cost.
100%.
So help me understand how you'd navigate that conversation with a client, because then that might be a case where releasing money for a lifetime mortgage really works, right?
Yeah, this is where what we would say, if they were still playing permanently in St. Lucia, keep your main home in UK or keep your home in UK. Property, rental income will build. You've got the opportunity there to come back as when you want to. You don't want to rent it out. But ultimately, with care, you can put a first charge out for a later life lending side of RIOs or extra release. That way then would allow the family, when care is a very long line, I know AIM means business, got Redfield care there, from the social care side in the own home, the ultimate in a care home, it can provide that additional income. Hopefully you're talking from 85 onwards, to be fair, but good planning will prevent a problem, because at the moment, we list in this area, looking £1,200 a week already.
Yeah.
So it's
not
very
sensible.
important to plan for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Lisa, on the so you've gone into this firm, you've talked a little bit about strategy with them. They're in a position where they've sort of worked out where they want to go, but they've still got this direct issue with this individual who's quite direct. How are you going to manage that?
I think, you know, I mean, these sorts of things are always really difficult because, you know, people's behaviour in the workplace, that people often don't realise how they behave. Lots of us don't. So from my experience of those kind of situations, people are often completely unaware that they've even upset anybody or caused any offence. So normally, the best way to try and resolve it is a sort of an informal mediation approach. And mediation is a hard word, and I would never call it that. My suggestion would be that, you know, if they wanted support, then I would support them. If not, if someone felt confident enough to bring them both together and talk to them, then that's what we call sort of individual resolution. So one-to-one, where you can try and, you know, iron out the issues professionally with each person, and kind of then, you know, bring to their attention how each of them have made one another feel. So never making it loaded on just one side. It's about keeping it balanced. Otherwise, you know, it can upset the other person. Then it can be really, really difficult to bring it back into any kind of resolution.
How would you manage that? Would that be via a facilitator like you, or would it? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you know, when I managed a team of people a few years ago, because you know the personalities, sometimes you can do it yourself if you feel confident enough to bring them both into the room, because you know them well enough, and it's not at that point where it's somebody's seriously offended. It's just getting a little bit edgy. But you know, 9 times out of 10, it's probably best to avoid that and get an independent, impartial person in to just sit down and have a chat with them. You know, it doesn't need to be made out to be any bigger than that. It's just about, you know, if we don't resolve these issues in the workplace, this is when we get work stuff not getting done, because they then won't work together, and then that creates other issues for the business.
I mean, it sounds like on this case, it's got to a point where it's got quite serious, because she's accusing the other individual of bullying.
Yeah.
Is there any formal arrangements at that point, if there's been an accusation made, that they need to?
Of course. I mean, I mean, what you could do is you could try the informal. I would always try informal first, because that's, once you go formal with anything like a grievance route, etc., that ups the ante on it, and then it's really hard to put those relationships potentially back together again, because it's become very formal. So I would always try the informal approach first, see if we think that's going to work. If not, if the person is still completely, you know, against that and wants to, you know, call it out, then they've got to go down the grievance route, and you'd have to advise them of how they do that and their right to be accompanied and all the rest of it. But you also have to spell out to them that once you start that process, it's a formal.
You've formalised it, right? Yeah.
Press the button, and that's like, you can't just pause it in the middle of the whole thing. You've got to go the full journey with it, essentially, and that might not always result in the answer that you wanted, or the outcome.
Who ultimately makes that decision? Is it the individual who's made the complaint?
No, I mean, you'd raise the grievance, and then you'd have it investigated, and that essentially is what I was talking to you about this morning, Chris, that piece of work that I've just done.
Yeah.
I've been in and investigated the grievance, so I've heard everybody's input, and then I've made a decision and gone back to the client, and with potential recommendations around how we could, because what we want to do is learn from it and not have this again. Yeah. Because that whole stuff, it impacts on productivity, it impacts on engagement, it impacts on profit, because everyone sort of goes down.
Okay, so talk to me, help me understand then what you do after that. So you've done the investigation, you've given the learnings.
Yeah.
Then what are you doing? Are you saying to them, these are the systems and processes you'll need to put in place?
You'd have a look. I mean, what I would do is look at different policies and procedures, different processes they have. You know, do they train people, which I mentioned earlier? You know, dignity and respect in the workplace, all that sort of thing. So I'd kind of dig up the drains a bit, and then go back to them and say, this, as far as I'm concerned, would be a good approach to putting an action plan into your business, so that you address these different issues with policies or training or processes, and then we don't have, hopefully, a repeat of the situation. And 9 times out of 10, you know, when people feel they're being treated a certain way, it comes down to communication. It's quite often a communication failure. It's about different styles and how we put ourselves across.
So I've been reading this amazing book at the minute. I just want to share by a guy called Chris Voss, called Never Split the Difference. Has anybody ever read it? It's by he's an ex-FBI hostage negotiator, and it's really interesting in terms of the linguistic approaches he takes to make sure that he's tackling tough subjects but doing it with subtlety. Really, really interesting. I'd recommend that everybody gives that a go. Sarah, how are you?
Cute. I'm really good. I'm so sorry for joining late.
Good. So number one, well done on your plant game. I love the plant in the background. I thought I had my bookshelf game going, but now you've brought plant into the mix. I need to get a plant there for my background. And where you been? You've been listening to Paul McCartney? No, I know you've been at a set.
No,
I'm gonna let you off. Did you get a copy of the case study?
I did. It's here. I have it. I've written notes all over it.
Cool.
I don't...
So share with us what your thoughts were.
Well, there were just a few things. I mean, obviously there was something in there about financial well-being, so I'll go on that. But I had the thing that really was like whoop, 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 was the £120,000 that Andrew and Helen have got sitting in their joint bank account. I was like, oh my goodness, they need some advice, don't they? What is it doing sitting there? Have they used up their pension tax reliefs? Have they used up their ISA tax reliefs? Blah, 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 blah. All of that came out. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to be Helen. I'd love to be going over to St. Lucia to live, if I'm totally honest.
Would you add that? So the part of the conversation that you missed was whether it's right for them to run the business or whether they're doing it just because they want that lifestyle on the boat. So how would you explore that potentially if that was right for them?
Yeah, because I'm not sure Andrew's too sure, is he? Because he's got this event management business, which he's not really doing anything in at the moment because of the situation, but he might be able to, yeah, and he would be able to potentially do it over there. So yeah, I think it's an emotional thing, isn't it? It's about really understanding what your life looks like. And when we, sometimes, as part of Better Money, sometimes we do these retirement sessions with people and just trying to get them to understand what is it that they love about work actually, that they might then want to take with them even as their life develops. You know, is it the structure? Is it the social contact? Is it the network of people that they've built up? You know, and is that a big enough pull to say, actually, we want to carry on doing what we're doing. We might want to do less hours, or we might want to change it slightly, but we really enjoy all of that stuff. Or actually, no, let's move on from the business, but take all of those aspects with us and take all of that to the boat and, you know, bring that social aspect. So I think, I mean, there's so much stuff in here. It was a brilliant case study.
It's really interesting. You probably know who I'm talking about. There's a guy who's got a riverboat on the Thames. Do you know Henry Tapper? No, Henry. Yeah. So I've been on Henry's boat a few times up and down the Thames. I've never had that experience. It's a really good day out. I took the kids and it was brilliant. So he's got a boat that's moored near Henley, and we just like sort of. So yeah, when you get the chance, I'll let you know when he puts it on his Facebook, because it'd be good to. It's really a good day to do. But what I was going to say was he works from his boat. You know, he's got Wi-Fi on his boat, and just that flexibility of lifestyle we've got now is interesting, isn't it? You know, it's that, well, if you can do it anywhere, where would you choose to do it? You know, that's the thing. One thing I was going to talk to you about, Sharon, was the tax implications of him running the business from St. Lucia. So let's say, for example, he's in a position where he goes, right, I'm off to St. Lucia. I'm gonna run the business from there, but I'm now considered non-domicile or non-resident. What happens in terms of the tax, assuming he keeps the limited company in the UK?
So this gets really, really interesting because it depends on St. Lucia's viewpoint. So I'm dealing with a client at the moment she's just become Spanish resident. Her personal tax is in Spain, and the Spanish authorities are in the process of saying, well, really, her limited company should be a Spanish limited company, and it can't stay in the UK. So, but each worldwide country effectively has their own stand on this.
But typically there's a double taxation agreement, isn't there?
It's double taxation agreements, but it depends. So there's a lot of paperwork to fill in for the double taxation agreements. It really depends on where they're going and what St. Lucia's standpoint is. The Spanish authorities in this company, for this particular company, are fighting really hard to say this is not a UK company. There's no connections to the UK for this company. It needs to be Spanish registered.
Even though the revenue, does it matter where the revenue's from? You know, if the income's coming from UK sources, would that have an impact?
So it does have an impact if the revenue is UK impact, and that makes things a little bit easier. If all of the revenue is UK revenue, if some of the revenue is rest of world, and with an entertainment business it could well be, then there's an argument that it's not technically a UK company any longer.
Gotcha. So how about taking income out? Could they still take dividends, but it might be taxed in St. Lucia? Help me understand a bit about that.
It would get taxed in St. Lucia.
Okay.
If they're domiciled in St. Lucia, it goes on their St. Lucia tax returns, and that's where it gets taxed.
Okay, cool, good stuff. The other thing I was going to mention from my side, and more on the inheritance tax situation, and I don't know whether Andrew and Helen will find themselves with an inheritance tax liability, because if they start drawing down on what they've got in terms of capital, their cash flow might be below the inheritance tax threshold. Because at the minute, if they give, and again, it doesn't say whether they've got kids or not, but if they give their main property to a direct descendant, they've actually got £1 million worth of inheritance tax. So they've got 500k each. One thing that they might want to bear in mind, though, is if Andrew keeps his limited company and it continues to trade as an active company, they get business property relief. So effectively, the money in the business, the value of the business, the value of the shares wouldn't be liable for inheritance tax at all. Challenge he's got is as soon as he gets that out, it then forms part of his estate. So he's then in a position where it's then chargeable to inheritance tax. And I've had a client that I've worked with for a number of years, actually got some bad advice from an accountant a few years ago not to liquidate. So he's now got an inactive trading company. Like it's just, and that means that there's 500,000 sitting in his company account that we can't extract in time to create some issues. So maybe that he should liquidate sooner rather than later. Friday, in terms of the first natural steps of working with Shirley, who's super busy, doesn't want to think about some of these longer term issues because she's got 7 years. How would you approach that situation?
It's going to be a bit of a challenge because she's obviously very well settled in her career, and her identity is quite closely linked with what she does, and she knows it. So the first thing is to really take some time out and space away from her familiar environment, so she doesn't get distracted. And it's really to have a clear, honest conversation about where she is in life. An important thing is where she's come from, because that's a determining factor of how you move forward. Things that she has actually acquired in terms of habits and behaviors is what she is today. So moving forward, if she doesn't have that, then realizing or understanding, becoming aware of what habits she has, and are they still serving the purpose that for moving forward? So it's really addressing those, and then see how gradually she can change and ease into creating a different lifestyle. So she doesn't have a bind on the past, and she's quite clearly understanding about that.
You know what's interesting? I'm doing some work at the minute with a couple who run a events business, who do getaways for people. I think it might be a good introduction for you, Pradeep. So remind me to introduce you to Peter and Hilary. Just remind me on that. But they run an events company where they take individuals like Shirley away from their lives. They go to Ireland for a weekend, because what they said is that trying to do it in their office means they're still in work mode.
Yeah.
So how important is it, do you reckon, to just get that independent space to think about some of these issues, and how do you work with clients to do that?
Very much so. I think we all owe it to ourselves, because we become so busybody that we don't even have time to think for ourselves what's important. So certainly in a away day, what I normally offer my client is, look, you don't have to pay me, just spend a day with me. All you have to do is buy me a lunch. And we'll go away somewhere remote, away from home, away from their work environment, and just spend a day chatting. Yeah, if they like, we're outdoors, we'll go for a walk. If it's something indoors, relaxing around a pool, we'll do that. But it's totally different area from what they're accustomed to on a 24/7 basis. And that, I think we owe it to on a timely basis, even if it's once a year. No matter how much social interaction you have with your nearest and dearest, sometimes you just need that time. It's a bit like, that's why we've invented the man cave, to to get away from the rest of the world and just spend time for ourselves. And I think that applies to the ladies as well, where you spend time on a spa and treatments like that, just to get away from the hustle and bustle of life. So it's important that that time spent is well time spent for thinking through what are the next steps. I can't actually tell right now what steps she can take until you open up a conversation and identify what are the deep desires that they have that have remained unfulfilled.
Just to be clear, Pradeep, like going to the spa is not only a female thing. I love a good sort of spa break. I mean, I don't know what you got against spas.
I've got nothing against spas. I like a good scrub myself around the back.
This is getting weird now.
Chris, the spas, what they called 7-Elevens before?
Yeah, I normally go to the Safeway, Rich. I mean, that was my, or Quick Save. I don't know. That was the big one for me. Lisa, do you think that's important in terms of developing an HR strategy, that people move away from the office? Because I know that. Yeah, tell me a bit about that.
I always used to do like away days, a bit like you were just saying, but actually getting out of the work environment into a completely different environment allows people to be that much more creative quite often, because sometimes in the work environment we feel, I don't know, it's work, isn't it? So, and also you can always be distracted by something else going on. Even if you ask people not to disturb you, they'll still be banging on your door or whatever. So definitely going away out of the office, being able to have that head space and that physical space to actually look at, I don't know, a strategic plan, a people plan, a recruitment, anything really, anything you want to go and spend some time on, maybe looking at some problem solving, it's such a good thing to do, certainly in my experience. And I do that with clients, I encourage them to do that, and the employees like it as well, even if it's just an away day where you're buying them a nice lunch and a few nice coffees and teas during the day, and they finish at 3 o'clock instead of 5. You're on to that straight away. But
the relationship's different, isn't it? The relationships you build are different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it also allows for that opportunity where you have, like, maybe in a large organisation or business where you have maybe you've got split site working, which always can create a them and us kind of situation, or even silos with different teams. You get everyone together and mix them all up and get them to do some constructive activities, but fun, not something, that they hate the thought of going. You want them to come feeling energized and to bring their creativity with them. So I've always done stuff like that and still do with clients. And it always, generally 9 times out of 10, ticks a massive box in terms of something you want to achieve, and you come away with a plan. to implement in the business. Why wouldn't you do that?
So this is a perfect opportunity for Sarah to talk to us a little bit about what she does. Help me understand how you, sorry, just before we do that, so everybody knows, if you explain a little bit about what you do, that'd be amazing. Sorry, I didn't do that. I should have done that. I was too busy talking about the plant and Paul McCartney. You just interrupt me. But talk to me a little bit about and share with the room what you do, but also how you engage people in a conversation that potentially some people might say, we love it, Sarah, but some people might say it's a bit dry.
Yes, that is the main issue. Right. So, yeah, I run a business called Better with Money, which is workplace financial education. Really, you know, we're not talking high-end financial decisions here. We're talking helping the everyday person understanding how to budget, how to deal with their debt, the options for saving, and all the rest of it. I mean, I'm sure most of you are aware that most of the days off work are because people feel stressed and anxious. That is the biggest cause of workplace absence, and the majority of that is because of finances. So more and more employers now are buying into the fact that if they can use some of their budgeting spend on helping people financially, it not only makes the employee happier, but it makes a more productive workforce. So yeah, we offer everything from, well, what used to be face-to-face education, actually, sitting in rooms, workshops, lunch and learns, just getting people to chat and share their ideas actually about how they save money. Obviously overnight we've pretty much switched that to webinars, but we also do financial friend type sessions, which again, none of this it flips into advice at any stage. It's all information, but you know, people can come to us, book in a half an hour slot and ask anything from, I've got a bit of debt and I don't know whether I should be using my savings to pay that off, or I've got a pension here and should I be transferring it over? What are the sorts of things I look at? And yes, as you say, Chris, all of those subjects can be really dry. But actually, I think it's just about bringing a human element and telling stories and giving people, you know, saying, oh, I did that. And actually, what I found worked best was, rather than saying, you know, this is what you do and here's 3 points to do it. And I do just think it's trying to connect with people on their level, you know, and back to that thing you were saying, Lisa and Pradeep and Chris, about taking people outside of their environment. I totally concur with that. I mean, some of the best networking events I've ever been to, you know, maybe it's because they were abroad, but they were abroad. It took people not only outside of their office, but outside of the country. And it stops people from thinking, oh, I'll just do that email, or I'll just pick up my phone, you know, or, you know, there's no signal in the hotel. So actually, I've got to talk to the people around me. And I've made my very, very best friends and closest connections through work, through events like that, you know, and I try to do the same actually with my clients now. It might be classed as old school, but, you know, when we can, take them for lunch, take them for a coffee, get to know who they are, because that is when people start to trust you and connect. And I try to bring the same sort of things through the webinar. That's why I was late. I just had a webinar for a firm of accountants, and it was the basic how to be better with money. I think it's, yeah, bringing a bit of normality.
Bit of personality, bit of fun, building relationships. I mean, Lisa and I got together earlier on a different subject, and both of us said, even though that's a ring doorbell, isn't it? Whose doorbell is it? Both of us, Sharon, both of us said, I can't wait to get back to a period where we're actually seeing each other face to face again. And it's interesting because, funny enough, Charlie, who a lot of you know works with me at Cervello, we were saying that we think actually the nature of work may change, but you still, like sort of an extrovert like me, still wants that human connection. How are you finding it, Pradeep, in terms of, I know Sharon's been having meetings by a dock, haven't you, Sharon? You did tell me that earlier. But how are you finding like replacing that human connection?
I think very much so, because we do get disconnected from each other. And, you know, we may be living together physically, but sometimes there is not that mental connection. And often the case is recognizing that, there are frictions involved sometimes in misunderstandings. These are clear signs that, there is something amiss. So when you actually take them separate, we can actually be open about this, and we can really dig deep, drill deep about what is it that they're carrying from the past. It could have been something that happened, something that experienced, they're living with it. And what tends to happen when the time is right, it kicks in. So what you experienced tens of years ago can probably come back to you now, and you're replicating that behavior. So recognizing that will help you to undo that and then live it in a different way. So those kind of opportunities are very rare to build a future life, because when you recognize how much things you picked up. I've got a client at the moment, he's an ex-forces chap, and the example I used is that when he's training, he's got a backpack, something that he carries 30 kilos or something like that, and where they get accustomed to that weight in the back. And likewise, we carry a lot of that stuff in our back, in mental state and physical, basically, because it is a physical thing as well. You experience that sensation. To unpack that, sometimes you need somebody to help you yank it off. And that takes a bit of an effort. Sometimes you could say, oh, I can undo it myself. But no, it can be difficult because it becomes part of you throughout your every decades that you live, which means that it makes it difficult for you to move forward, to decide and bring something new. But when you take that dead weight off, the world opens up with new things.
Okay, thanks, Brady. Sharon, how are you thinking the world of work is going to change moving forward? Do you think it will be sort of different as we go on?
I think it will be different, and I think there's going to be a bit of a combination, because you've got to have offices that I think are going to be stood empty, because I don't think everybody is going to return to an office at some point, especially if you look at central London, the prices of office space in central London. Some people are not going to go back to full office space. And
So it's really interesting. I was having a conversation with one of my clients who runs his own business, but he's also the trustee of a charity. And they've got premises in town, and their rent review was coming up. So they were saying, look, actually, we don't think this was like sort of last year when we did his last review. We were just going to say no to the premises because we didn't think we were going to need them anymore. And actually, that negotiation has changed now because they're in the driving seat, aren't they? Because actually, the demand for commercial premises, particularly in town, is going to be completely different.
Going to plummet, absolutely. And I think commercial rents in central London are going to have to come down because they're just not going to get rid of the space. I also think an awful lot of office space in central London are going to become social housing, because at the end of the day, they're going to convert them into flats. Then there's no point in them stood there unused. WeWork, I think, could be making a really big comeback. This could be the best thing that ever happened for WeWork.
Yeah, they've gone through a bit of a sort of up and down over the last couple of years, haven't they?
Yeah, I think this could be a big thing for them because people are going to do things differently.
Yeah, it's interesting. Richard, what are you doing about face-to-face and sort of remote? Are you dying to get back to face-to-face or not?
Yeah, I think so. Only so much you can do over the phone and Zoom calls. And this is about, how long have I been on there today? This is about my 4th hour. I had 2 this morning, I think, before this. So, which is all right, by the way. But I do prefer the face-to-face interaction. But we've come a bit of a way forward, though, because in the first lockdown, 1.0, there wasn't much activity. And so the lenders, the surveyors and the valuers all got together, and the solicitors got together and kind of found a way out of it.
I mean, the market's better in lockdown 2.0.
Absolutely. They found ways of, agreeing with the authorities on certain checkpoints, certain activities that could be done remotely, or we had a solicitor who would drive up to someone's house with 2 iPads that were all sanitized. He put his gloves on, the mask on, post it through the letterbox, and he goes back to his car. He then does a video call with them. You can see them through the front window. So all that type of stuff's going on.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a better way of doing it, but I think digitally for speed as well. I think the world's going to change.
I think the other thing it's done is just highlight how much we can do if we need to, in a bit more of an efficient way. And certainly in our world, things like digital signatures, which some of the providers won't take, they've got to take them now to move stuff forward, and it's made it a bit more efficient. But Lisa, you are desperate to get back to seeing people face to face, because we've had this conversation. Do you think the dynamic of what you do is a bit tougher when you're not face to face?
Yeah, I mean, this, as I said to you, this investigation that I was just buried in throughout the whole of November, more or less. I mean, it's okay doing those kind of interviews when people have got grievances over Zoom, but it's better to be across the table from them, particularly if you feel someone needs a break. You can read the body language better. And I don't know, it's quite an artificial kind of setup, really, that we just, as human beings, it's quite alien to us, although we've all had to adapt. And clearly there will still be a way of working with Zoom and everything going forwards. But yeah, I mean, I do prefer the sort of, going in to the office environment, and it feels real.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I'll do probably 2 or 3 meetings like this a day. I'll get to the end of the day and I'll feel tired. Whereas if I was doing face-to-face meetings, I'd feel quite infused. And it's just that different dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, no, when the pandemic first hit, because I teach the HR qualification as well, I suddenly had 2 classes shifting across to Zoom, never done it in my life, and 1 class with 20 students on it. And when you're suddenly sitting there with 20 faces looking at you, trying to work out how to share the slides and do all of that, after 3 hours, I'm just, even now, I'm still I'm more tired than when I'm walking about in the classroom doing teaching, and an hour's journey either way. So it's intense, isn't it? It's quite intense.
Ian, talk to me about what's been happening in your business in terms of the changes you've made, particularly as you're clearly not getting the chance to use flip charts, which is new knowledge for me, mate. Apparently you love them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was in response to Lisa's thing about an away day. I mean, if you're going to take people from a reasonable sized business away, having a way of recording all of that downpouring of information is absolutely essential. There is so much that pours out that then what I do with that is then I try and then work with the client over the next 2 or 3 meetings to get it into some kind of an order. And it's very, very difficult to do that same kind of thing when you're in a virtual space. Yes, you can use the whiteboard, but it's not the same. You can have people with you can create teams on the table, and you can give the teams different coloured post-it notes to put onto the flip chart, and you can kind of make it a piece of fun along the way. Have I got them with me here? Yeah, I have.
Ian, have you brought your own
2 little friends?
Chart? Oh no, okay.
No, got my 2 little friends here. That always used to help me in visual sessions. So there's always things that you can do visually a lot more, physically a lot more easily than you can do virtually, and it does tend to open people up more. You can have more fun. You can play around more.
Oh, thank you. And Kevin, what are you doing? I mean, I know you're managing to run the business quite well without doing face-to-face, but I know that, like, particularly your client demographic likes that personal face-to-face relationship, doesn't it? So help me understand how you're coping, and whether you go back to a purely face-to-face service when this all goes back, or actually it will be a mixture of the 2.
I think it'll be a mixture, to be honest, Chris. Yes, I enjoy face-to-face, and I am not doing face-to-face now from 10 days ago. I've had a record month, but that's just been opportunity on rebrotes where I've seen people on that side of it. I think going forward, it's an option you've got to add. There'll probably be a Zoom meeting, will be part for the section of the sign-on, where the fact find could well be the face-to-face where you want to get in, feel the scenario, see it, remark on their history in the room or pictures, see their response of it. It's a soft facts which you miss on Zoom. I think it'll be a mixture going forward.
I think the interesting thing is, like, sort of for really important decisions, and as Sarah said, we in the UK we're not particularly good at talking about money. For those really, like, for somebody to come to me and go, here's my life savings, can you help me make sure that it never runs out? You probably want to see somebody face to face just to see whether you can work with them over the next 20 years. You know, it's a big decision, right, working with anybody in this room, but it's really important to do.
I think the process is that, but you do get ones in the mid-70s, higher 70s who may not have the computer technology. There's no option there. You've got to go face to face. That's the ones I've done the visits this time. I'm never going to say no to it. Even to the point, I don't want to go to the tubes at present. Happy in the main line. I will actually drive around Shepherd's Bush 10 days ago. To be honest with you, quite a pleasant journey, made a nice change. Yeah. And you pay the parking.
Well, you're at the house, mate.
Yeah, at the house, mate. I haven't been out much the last 10 days, but again, you get enough stuff there, so it's always that balance. But it's nice to get out, to put a suit on, go out, see the face-to-face, feel the situation. You miss that side of it, but you've got to be productive as well. And if health is important.
Yeah, you know what? It's you know, respecting what's going on at the minute as well. That's the issue. Sarah, I'm conscious that sort of I made sure that in the case study I wrote a big chunk about the fact that you've got this employers reviewing their employee benefits package, and we've ignored that entirely. So I want to make sure that we talk about it and we'd highlight potentially what you'd do to help that employer understand what might be right for them and their teams.
Yeah, I think so. The first thing when it comes to financial well-being and things like this, we never want to make it a tick box, you know. And I think the first error that companies can make is think that they need to throw money at something to make it work. And actually, in the majority of companies, they've already offering lots of benefits, and they have to offer a pension, for example, which is costing them a lot of money, and people don't always understand that, and therefore they're not maximizing the return on that investment, and people are not really getting what it means to them. So I think the first thing always would be to look at what you've got already, almost make an inventory. Are there ways that we could improve the employee's understanding of what you're already offering? Yeah. Step number one in terms of financial well-being, because you know you don't need to just keep adding other benefits, because the more choice people have got, the less likely they're going to do anything at all.
It's really interesting, because and Lisa might have said this, you know, like if we went into an employer, or you went into an employer, and they were adding 8, 10, 12% extra onto their employees' salary through benefits, which can potentially happen and more. Why are they hiding their light under a bushel? Do you know what I mean? Why are they not communicating how valuable that is? And potentially could that, you know, if somebody, like if another firm offers them £5,000 a year more in salary, are they comparing like for like benefits? Exactly. And do they understand what they're getting?
Yeah, I mean, you often find people, but people will often be spending, you know, £250,000, £1 million on pension contributions. And then, you know, you might go in with a quote of £2,000 to communicate it. And they're like, oh no, we don't have the budget for that. You're like, oh, come on. You know, you've got to have some give and take here. Make the most of what you're spending.
But also, how much would they spend on a recruiter to recruit somebody new for somebody who left to somewhere else because they don't understand what their pension is?
Exactly, and it's about that total reward. And so yeah, before I hand it over, I would always suggest that education around what's already there is a really good place to start, and to do a little bit of employee type survey work to see what is it that people are actually valuing, what is it that they want, and then that can inform what that financial wellbeing program looks like going forward, whether that is more education on the financial basics, or whether actually, there are so many companies out there that do a match basis on pensions. And people don't understand. They don't know if they put an extra 1%, which doesn't even cost them 1% because of the tax relief, that they'll get an extra 1% from their company and so on. So
I was doing some work with a private client of mine quite recently. It was about 6 weeks ago now, and she worked for a local authority. And I said, look, have you looked at salary sacrifice as an option to, because there was an AVC pension that she could pay into as part of the salary sacrifice arrangement, and the employer was prepared to contribute their element of national insurance. So that's an extra 13.8% she's getting in her pension for nothing, and she just didn't know. And it's that education element that you could just fill those gaps. Lisa, do you think that employers, in your experience, do enough when it comes to educating? And what do how do you fill that gap?
I think it's difficult with pensions. I mean, to be fair, I've just turned 50 and I've just actually done a pension review of my own and have completely forgotten what I'd got anyway. But that's a lot of people just don't really. It depends. Oh, it's a pension. It's not the fluffy, interesting stuff like a gym membership part of the benefit, for example. So I think it's about it does come back to communication without a doubt. So it's keep on reminding the workforce, well, what else do we offer you apart from a salary and flexible working and whatever else we do? It's all part of the whole makeup of why we want you to work for us, why you want to pick us as your employer of choice, and then we want you to stay. So I think you've got to have almost a regular sort of communication through some sort of e-newsletter or something, I don't know, or bringing someone in to give a talk to the staff, like somebody like Sarah that will come in and make it real, so they then understand what's going on with the pension pot, for example, because it's a big contribution that's hidden.
Yeah, but let me ask you a question. Since COVID, flexible working is a standard now, isn't it? It's not a differentiator.
No. Yeah, and I think it's interesting actually because, again, I worked with clients that were like, oh no, flexible work, no, we're not doing that. Well, we've had no choice, frankly, in the last 9 months. It's like flexible working or close your business in some respects. Yeah. So we've proved that we are capable of running things from home, not for every industry, but there's lots and lots that are now remotely working, as we were talking earlier. London's empty. It's not going to be as full once people start going back. They'll continue to work remotely because we've now demonstrated that actually we can do this, and you can, as the employer, trust us to do it. That's the big problem with flexible working, is overcoming the trust barrier for some employers previously. So I think it's blown the myth out of the water in some respects. You've still got people, but it's kind of blown the myth out of the water.
I mean, I suppose the other thing is as well, if you look at the loss in productivity, if there is any, does it compare the amount that a big business might save by not having their London premises? Do you know what I mean? There's like, and I think the trust you give people is normally paid back. One of my team is up in Birmingham at the minute because when lockdown 2 started, we said to him, look, he's got a flat down here, but be with your family and be in that bubble. And since he's been up there, he's passed the exam and he's like sort of getting involved in. So it's giving that trust, isn't it? As an employer, just making sure you give that trust. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
So just as we wrap up, bit of a round robin. Pradeep, help me understand where what's the first step for the people involved. We did have a case study. I don't know if you remember. That was like half an hour ago. But let's just talk about the case study again and just see what would be the first action you'd take with Shirley and her husband and Pepsi or
hold on. Has Shirley got a husband?
Helen and her husband and Shirley. Sorry, got it wrong way around.
Yeah, certainly with the couple itself is really the next step is particularly with the COVID situation, and we talked about the lockdown as well. And it's important to be able to communicate face to face as well. But in the absence of that, we really need to make the most of the technology that we have. We've been forced to use it, and no matter how old school we are, we like to go back to face to face. At the moment, that's not possible. So it's really engaging with them individually as well as collectively together, and then asking them what's important to them and what is it they are able to do right now, not addressing what they can't do. There are a lot of things that they can do now, and also exploring the options.
So when you say individually, Pradi, would you, with Helen and Andrew, would you sit down with them individually, or would you get them together?
Both. I would sit down individually with each other, and then both of them together, because initially you tap on the ideas from what they've got, because sometimes when you have the other person who's familiar with you, you're not always forthcoming with things because you don't want to upset them or contradict themselves. So being on your own can allow you to open up with a lot more scope to think for yourself. And then when we get back together, then there's a joint dynamics of things that they share, the ideas that they have, aspirations that they have together. So that comes to play as well, to the forefront. Shirley, again, is an individual. So for her, it's important because does she have things to relate with somebody? And what's her aspiration? I mean, sometimes it's by choice where people are single, and they're quite happy with it. And a lot of the introverts are in that space. So I respect them. I don't judge them that they should have a partner or something. Just because we have it, we can't judge. So
whatever makes you happy, right?
So taking Shirley where she is and what she is comfortable with, because she may have other outlets of fulfilling those particular needs, but she could be perfectly happy with what she is, self-fulfilling, self-sufficient. And a key word here is, I know a lot of women who are very, very staunch independent. They don't believe in dependence on anybody else as well. And they're very formidable at it. They're very, effective in their life, how they conduct themselves and fulfill the needs that they have. And these are, I'm talking about really mature people who are not widows, but just singletons.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? It's a weird one, and I don't want to get too personal about it, but I've got 2 daughters, and I want them to be fully independent. I want them to be able to do whatever they want to do, and they're fully capable of, without needing a relationship in whatever way they want. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, to be honest. I think that's just a life choice, isn't it?
It's really understanding. I had one client 2 years ago, and she lives in Chelsea. She grew up in an independent boarding school. That's where they taught her being self-sufficient and independent. And she grew up throughout her professional life being independent. She had a fantastic career, amassed a hell of a lot of wealth. And a bit like Shirley, she was very independent. And even if it meant there was a broken leaking tap or something like that, she would try and do it herself, fix it herself. If worse comes to worse and it sprung a leak, then she'll need somebody.
Mate, the only one in my house who's dependent is me, because I'm useless at most stuff. So the girls are great, but I'm the one that's still trying to learn. Sharon, what are your final thoughts?
If she can unmute herself. Sorry. Sorry, Chris, you've completely thrown me. Come back to me. Give me a second. Sorry.
Richard, final thoughts and next action you'd recommend?
Next action I recommend, well, I was actually pinpointing it towards a life coach or somebody like yourself or a business mentor. Have that kind of conversation, a holistic overall one.
It's that helicopter view, isn't it?
Absolutely right. I would touch upon it and then refer it out to the right specialist, and then I'd come back and I'd transact on the property finance side of things.
Lisa, where would you start with the business?
I think I'll come back to what I said earlier. There's a complete lack of any sort of framework or planning in here from what I can see. So I would want to create the right framework, supported by a delivery plan and an action plan around training, the dignity and respect at work stuff, looking at what's going on with the dynamics. It would all spin out of an action plan that I would definitely want to create and then implement and take them on a journey of change.
How would that start? Would that start with a conversation with one particular individual or the board, or how would you start?
Really, you'd go and talk to your most senior. You kind of do a bit of a temperature test from what you've seen here. This is what you're presented with. Maybe dig it out a bit. Then go and talk to the senior team, the board, whoever is the decision-making people, because they're going to agree to invest in what you're going to propose, because there's always going to be a cost. I'd go and have a discussion with them first about initial findings and thoughts and outline recommendations, and also explain the benefit of why you need a plan to support your strategic plan. So a people plan that sits underneath it, and then the action plan would spin out of that. So I would go there first and then filter it through.
So one of the interesting things about that is that value add element. So Sarah touched on it earlier on. How do you make sure that when you're going into a client like that, they are sort of understanding that this is something they definitely should do?
Normally what gets their attention, Chris, is if you spell it out in financial terms. Like if you don't believe it, this is what it could cost. That's how I normally put it. I think I'm a bit unique in that respect because of my operational experience. I spin it round and put it in those real terms.
It's really interesting, because I had a client the other day who was sort of talking about she was a retained client, and we were talking about her ongoing fees. And what we did is I sent her an email saying, this is the value we add to your life and she's an ex-auditor, so she's like a numbers person. So I went, this is the value we add to your life every year. And we do a lot of IHC planning for her, so it was really easy to show that 40% of the estate saving every year was certainly worth our fee. But yeah, doing that is really important, I think. Kevin,
it gets the attention immediately.
Do you find, though, it depends on who you're speaking to? Because certainly when I'm having a conversation with an FD, they want to talk money, but the HR person, is slightly different in terms of their dynamic.
Well, that's what I mean, because I've had an operational background before I went into HR, I can present my argument around the cost bit, whereas a lot of HR practitioners just do the HR bit. There's nothing wrong with that, but they haven't got that wider experience in business that kind of magnifies, if you don't invest in this HR package, this could be the cost to the business for missing it, like particularly with recruitment and stuff like that, because it's so expensive, that turnover stuff, hugely expensive. So that's what I would do anyway, pound note signs.
Okay, well, I need to learn from that. I might be picking your brains on that in the future, Lisa. Kevin, final thoughts and next action. Is it just don't do anything for 10 years and come and have a chat with me then, or?
No, first of all, let's be pessimistic, Chris. First of all, go and speak to a solicitor that lost some power of attorneys for health and finance, obviously. Make sure your will was up to date. Go and enjoy life. Come talk to us 4 or 5 years down the road when your situation is there. Then we can talk more realistically from your property wealth, care, and EIHT income needed. As being
getting those core fundamentals in place, like will and power of
foundations in
100%. Yeah. Ian, thoughts?
I think Pradeep and Richard have kind of said everything that I want to say, perhaps in a slightly different way. Optionality is key for me. So looking at all of those different avenues, speaking with them individually, speaking with Helen and Andrew together, and if Shirley is going to be involved in Andrew's event management business, then all 3 of them together perhaps. But it's then going away, getting the right experts involved, as Richard said. The accountant is going to be one of those key elements, particularly on the events business side. If it runs, do they just run it as a UK business? Do they have 2 arms of it, one international, one UK? All of those kind of things, and you present them with the financial aspect of what their desires are telling them they want to do, and it is essentially their decision as to how they move.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I'm not saying I disagree with you and Pradeep's approach, because I don't. But we've had an experience recently where we've started work with a particular client. He engaged with us, and I said to him, I think we need to get both of you together. But the dynamic of the relationship when the wife was when the wife of this particular client was involved didn't work as well. And I wonder whether actually the first meeting we have as professionals should be with the couple.
I think Pradeep will agree with me here. It doesn't really work best that way. You don't really get to get to the real grassroots and the root of it all. If you see the people together, they're always going to have that certain nicety. But if eventually or ultimately, if you've got that undertone when you're speaking to them together, how the hell are they going to want a company together?
Sarah, final thoughts.
Right, well, I'll start on the company. So I will just wait for Lisa to do her strategic review and work out the absence that's happening because of stress and anxiety. And then hopefully she'll go, and I know this amazing service, Better With Money, who can help you with your financial well-being. So that's what I would do there. I mean, Helen and Andrew, I'm going to speak more as a friend, because obviously the services we offer probably wouldn't help them directly, but obviously to get a good financial advisor to map out all their bits and pieces. And I don't know if this came out earlier, but actually I think if someone's looking to make a permanent move somewhere, I would definitely recommend that they went and tried it. If they've got the ability to just live there for 3 months without making any rash decisions, as this is it, well, I feel like, just so that you're not experiencing it as a holiday maker, you are experiencing it on a day-to-day before selling everything up and making that move.
Test the life, right? You know, test the life before you sort of jump in with 2 feet.
And again, that's something that we talk about on our retirement course with people, is about, you know, often people want to sell up and they've got a dream of going down to Cornwall and living by the sea, and it all looks amazing and it's great in the summer, but then the winter comes and it's freezing and it's rainy and there's nobody there because people only go in the summer. I mean, I'm exaggerating, I'm sure it's a lovely place, but you know, you almost need to experience that and rent first before you move everything down.
Right, thank you, appreciate that. Sharon, coming back to you.
Sorry, got my act together now. Okay,
all right, no worries.
Lots of paperwork, wills, LPAs, shareholder agreements, getting a handle on what's going on with the event management business, what position it's in, what financial information they have, whether we push that to sale, if there is somebody internally, does he know someone who may want to buy it, even a competitor may want to take it on. There's lots of questions there, so we just need to get to the bottom of those. And for Shirley, really, what does she want to do with the rest of her life? Because until we really understand that, and who else has she got in her life? Yeah, exactly. So just help, like, so you want to understand what her next 10 years looks like, don't you? Yeah. I wonder as well. I mean, certainly a conversation we'd have with a client like Shirley is, what does the transition look like as well? Because it certainly won't be 7 years, I'm hanging up my boots and I'm going to go do something else, is it? It's going to be that sort of transitionary period. Exactly. Cool. Amazing. So it's for once I've finished on time, which is great news. I'm completely zoomed out now, so I'm off for a run while it's still light out. Thanks for everybody for getting involved with another Inner Circle. I don't think we're going to be doing one in December, unless Russ has arranged it for me already, which he might have done. But we'll certainly be back in January running another one. But I'm sure I'll see you around, and hopefully next time I see a lot of you, it'll be face to face. Have a lovely day, all.
Yeah.
See you
Bye. See you later.
next time. Bye for now.
Bye.